in your prepared statement that there are three basic criticisms of the FBI which it is addressing. The one that I was struck by was the middle one, where you say that the FBI failed to exchange information with other elements of the intelligence community, and that it is addressing that failure or that criticism. But what I hear from Mr. McGaffin and Mr. Hamre is that they wouldn't say that that's the right question. And so this is the second part of my question is to the two of you. Because the way you pose the question, it is not did they share the information they had, but did they cooperate with others in setting the strategic goals of collection and go out together with the other relevant agencies, primarily in the intelligence community, to seek out the right information domestically. And so my first question is whether the three of you would comment on that. That is, what is it that is the failure, if you will, and how are we going about addressing that failure? And if you could be brief, because I have a number of follow-ups, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I do think one of the failures was the failure to have in place, develop, foster intelligence collection as a function distinct from building criminal cases with criminal predicates. And I also think it was a failure not to have an analytical capability. And a lot of the sharing problems were caused by, in my view, ill-conceived constraints on law enforcement and the sharing of intelligence information. In terms of the setting of the target, it's true that intelligence collection is different than gathering, and it should be focused, and there has to be some agreement as to what the end is. But I also think we can get a little carried away here because a lot of this counterterrorism intelligence domestically within the United States has a somewhat of a tactical flavor to it. In other words, it is focusing on groups and elements. It's not sort of sitting back and saying, where's the next threat coming from? And, you know, is this a breeding ground for terrorists over here in this part of Africa or what have you? That's CIA's function. But the function of sort of protecting the homeland when groups get into the United States has a certain operational tactical flavor to it. And I'm not sure that, you know, it's the same as sort of doing national intelligence estimates and sitting around figuring that, you know, I don't think it takes that long to figure that out, frankly.
Some of bin Laden's involvement in international terrorism first came to the attention of the intelligence community in the early 1990s, as his direct involvement in planning and directing terrorism became more evident. The Counterterrorism Center, or CTC, created a unit to focus specifically on bin Laden and the threat he posed to U.S. interests. CTC personnel recognized as early as 1996 that bin Laden posed a grave danger to the United States. Following the August 1998 East Africa embassy bombings, the Director of Central Intelligence, or DCI, placed bin Laden's terrorist network among the intelligence community's highest priorities. The DCI raised the status of the threat further still when he announced to CIA managers in December of 1998, quote, "We are at war with bin Laden. There were no resources or people spared in this effort, either inside the CIA or the intelligence community," end quote. These were strong words. Rather than having a galvanizing effect, however, the Joint Agree records revealed that the intelligence community continued to be a fragmented, comprehensive strategy for bin Laden. The record also shows that the DCI was either unable or unwilling to enforce consistent priorities and marshal resources across the community. Evidence of a fragmented intelligence community can be found in the limited distribution of the DCI's declaration. The community as a whole had only a limited awareness of the statement. For example, although some senior NSA and DIA managers were aware of it, few FBI personnel were. The assistant director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division told the Joint Inquiry that he was not specifically aware of that declaration of war. Equally disturbing, Joint Inquiry interviews of FBI field personnel showed that they did not know of the DCI's declaration. Some had only passing familiarity with bin Laden and al-Qaeda before September 11th. Senior U.S. military officers were also unaware of the DCI's declaration. A former chief of the unit in the DCI's Counterterrorism Center, formed to focus on bin Laden, put it succinctly, quote, in my experience between 1996 and 1999, CIA's Director of Operations was the only component of the intelligence community that could be said to have been waging the war against bin Laden against the United States in August of 96. The rest of the CIA and the intelligence community looked on our efforts as eccentric and at times fanatic, end quote. Additional evidence of the absence of a comprehensive counterterrorism strategy and authoritative leadership can be found in the plan, as the DCI described in testimony before the joint inquiry. Quote, in spring of 1999, we produced a new comprehensive operational plan of attack against bin Laden and the al-Qaeda network inside and outside of Afghanistan. The strategy was previewed to senior CIA management by the end of July of 1999. By mid-September, it had been briefed to the CIA operational level personnel, to NSA, to the FBI, and other partners. The CIA began to put in place the elements of this operational strategy, which was structured the agency's counterterrorism activity until September 11th of 2001, end quote. According to documents reviewed by the Joint Inquiry, in 1999, the plan consisted of a variety of CIA covert actions against bin Laden. Later, in the year 2000, the plan came to include or focus principally on CIA covert action and technical collection aimed at capturing bin Laden. The plan was also significant for what it did not include, which was 1. A community estimate of the threat bin Laden network posed to the United States and to U.S. interests overseas. 2. Significant participation by elements of the intelligence community other than the CIA. 3. Delineation of the resources required to execute the plan. 4. Decisions to downgrade other community priorities to accommodate the priorities of the plan. 5. Attention to the threat and vulnerabilities of the U.S. homeland. 6. Discussion of FBI involvement in the plan. The Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division testified to the Joint Inquiry that the FBI had no war plan against bin Laden. Absolutely. We did not have a plan at that time, he said. When asked how the FBI's counterterrorism program fit into the overall community program, the Assistant Director replied, quote, I am not sure if I know the answer to that. I talked to the DCI briefly about this. I've talked to the CTC chief before. The answer to your question is, I don't know the answer, end quote. The lack of involvement by agencies other than the CIA is particularly troubling, given gaps in efforts by those agencies to address the threat. For example, while the CIA devoted resources to bin Laden, covert action, and Afghanistan, the FBI focused on investigating funding for terrorist groups other than the al-Qaeda network, even though FBI leadership recognized after the embassy bombings in August of 98 that al-Qaeda posed an increasing threat. In some FBI field offices, there was little appreciation for bin Laden and al-Qaeda, including the San Diego office, where FBI agents would soon discover, after September 11th, connections between terror sympathizers and at least 2 of the hijackers. Consistent with this evidence of the absence of a comprehensive strategy is a senior finding by the Inspector General for the Department of Justice that the FBI had never performed a comprehensive written assessment of the risk of the terrorist threat facing the United States. The report went on to say, quote, such an assessment would be useful not only to define the nature, likelihood, and severity of the threat, but also to identify intelligence gaps that needed to be addressed. Moreover, comprehensive threat and risk assessments would be useful in determining what to allocate attention and resources to on programs and initiatives to combat terrorism, end quote. This assessment still had not been completed as recently as FBI Director Mueller's joint inquiry testimony on October 17, 2002. Likewise, the DCI's National Intelligence Council never published a national intelligence estimate on the threat bin Laden and al-Qaeda posed to the United States. Absent a comprehensive strategy for combating the threat bin Laden posed, the DCI could not be assured that the entire intelligence community would focus on the war. The record of the joint inquiry also establishes that the DCI was unable or unwilling to enforce priorities and marshal resources in accordance with the declaration that the intelligence community was at war. Despite the DCI's declaration, Joint Inquiry heard repeatedly about CIA intelligence priorities that competed with bin Laden for personnel and funds, including other high-priority intelligence targets worldwide. NSA Director Michael Hayden described to the Joint Inquiry the situation at his agency before September 11th. Quote, "We, like everyone else at the table, were stretched thin in September of 2001. The war against terrorism was our number one priority. We had about 5 number one priorities, and we had to balance what we were doing against all of them," end quote. General Hayden also explained that he knew what NSA had to do to target bin Laden, but he had been unable to obtain sufficient community support and resources. He went on to say, quote, "Given all the intelligence priorities, it would have been difficult at that time within the intelligence community or the Department of Defense to accept the kind of resource decisions that would have been necessary to make our effort against the target more robust. NSA was focused heavily on a range of regional and global issues. Our resources, both human and financial, were in decline. Our efforts in the year 2000 to churn money internally were not accepted by the community. Its reliance on signals intelligence had made it reluctant to give it up," end quote. The Joint Inquiry record established that even within the CIA, the DCI did not enforce priorities on martial resources effectively against the Al-Qaeda threat. Despite the DCI's declaration of war against bin Laden, there is substantial evidence that the CIA's Counterterrorism Center had insufficient personnel before September 11th, which had a substantial impact on its ability to detect and monitor Al-Qaeda. For example, a former CTC chief testified before the Joint Inquiry that he did not have the resources to counter the threat bin Laden posed. Quote, "The 3 concepts I would like to leave you with are people, the finances, and operational approvals or political authorities. We didn't have enough of any of these before 9/11, end quote. When asked why personnel were not marshaled to CTC to fight bin Laden's network, the former chief recalled that CIA's Deputy Director of Operations, explaining that there was not enough personnel to go around and that CTC was already well supplied with staff compared to other CIA divisions. The former chief of the counterterrorism unit dedicated to bin Laden also told us in a judgment confirmed by his successor, quote, "We never had enough officers from the Director of Operations. The officers we had were greatly overworked. We also received marginal analytical support from the Directorate of Intelligence," end quote. In particular, a CIA officer commented on the reasons for the CIA's failure to follow through on information about 2 September 11 hijackers who came to the attention of the intelligence community in January of 2000. Quote, "How could these misses have occurred? The CIA operatives focused on the Malaysia meeting the hijackers attended. When it was over, they focused on other, more urgent operations against threats, real or assessed. Of the many people involved, no one detected that the data generated by this operation crossed a reporting threshold, or, if they did, they assumed that the reporting requirement had been met elsewhere. They are the kinds of misses that happen when people, even very competent, dedicated people, such as the CIA officers and the FBI agents and analysts involved in all aspects of the story, are simply overwhelmed," end quote. On September 12, 2002, there was a substantial infusion of personnel into the CTC. No comparable shift of resources occurred in December of 1998 after the DCI's declaration of war, or in December of 1999 during the Millennium Crisis, or in October of 2000 after the attack on the USS Cole. In testimony before the Joint Inquiry, DCI George Tenet asserted, in hindsight, "I wish I had said let's take the whole enterprise down and put 500 more people there sooner." It is noteworthy that the DCI's comments were limited to the CIA and did not encompass the resources of other agencies within the intelligence community. In response to questions about efforts to obtain additional counterterrorism resources, DCI Tenet described to the Joint Inquiry his inability before September 11th to generate necessary support within the executive branch. Quote, "I would ask every year in the budget submission. Now, I'm not talking about the committee. I'm talking about the front end at OMB and the hurdle you have to get through to fully fund what we thought we needed to do the job. Senator Kyle once asked me, 'How much money are you short?' I'm short about 900 million to 1 billion every year for the next 5 years, is what I answered. And we were told that everybody downtown, for as long as anybody would listen, and never got to first base. So you get what you pay for in terms of our ability to be as big and robust as people. And when I became director, we had case officers around the world. Now we're about up to so and so, and the president's given us the ability to grow that number by another so and so. And everybody wonders why you can't do all the things people say you need to do. Well, if you don't pay at the front end, it ain't going to be there at the back end, end quote. The inability to realign intelligence community resources to combat the threat bin Laden posed, as in part was a direct consequence of the limited authority the DCI enjoys over major portions of the intelligence community. As former Senator Warren Rubin noted in testimony before the joint inquiry, 85% of the intelligence community's budget is controlled by the Department of Defense. While the DCI has statutory responsibility spanning the intelligence community, his actual authority is limited to budgets and personnel over which he exercises direct control. The CIA, the Office of the DCI, and the community management staff. As former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Lee Hamilton told the joint inquiry, quote, currently, the Director of Central Intelligence, the leading intelligence figure, controls but a small portion of his budget. The DCI has, as I understand it, enhanced authority after 1997, and that permits him to consolidate the national intelligence budget to make some trade-offs. But given the overwhelming weight of the Defense Department in the process, that is of limited value. The thing that puzzles me here is why we reject for the intelligence community the model of organization that we follow in every other enterprise in this country. We have someone at the head who has responsibility and accountability. We accept that. But for some reason, we reject it when it comes to the intelligence community, end quote. In sum, the joint inquiry found leadership and structural failings in the intelligence community response to the bin Laden threat. Proposals to reconstruct the community are examined in another section of this report.